Hello and welcome to InSession Live. It is Thursday, March 27th. So grateful for all of you taking some time out of your busy days to join us to get a little learning in and virtual connection to one another. It is, like I said, Thursday, March 27th. For some of you, today may be a special holiday. It is baseball opening day. In our house, we celebrate the St. Louis Cardinals. I imagine many of you are Mariners fans. Go sports ball, whoever your team is, baseball, basketball, or whatever sport of your choosing. Hope things are going well. I'm going to talk about the legislative sporting events here for the next hour. So I'd like to acknowledge as we begin that our public schools and facilities operate on the traditional lands of Indigenous peoples. As we engage in the 2025 legislative session, we remember that the lands of our state capital were cared for by the people of the Squaxin and Nisqually tribes. We make these acknowledgments to open a space of recognition, inclusion, and respect for our sovereign tribal partners and all Indigenous students, families, staff, legislators, and board members in our communities. I'm going to get to some of this in the know stuff in a PowerPoint presentation. I have lots of resources to share with you today. So I hope you will be patient with me as a single screen holder here. I will be pivoting back and forth. So hopefully I don't give you a whiplash or make you dizzy, but it's all in an effort to be sure you have as many resources you need to sort of navigate this part of the legislative session, which can be a little bit confusing. So you'll see a bunch of hyperlinks. I'm going to try to get to all of these just to walk you through how I use them, as it may be instructive for you as well. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and close this part of the screen. The PowerPoint presentation that I created is not linked to today's agenda. So if you are interested in having it following this meeting, please feel free to email me and I will pass it your way. You will also note that I am looking to the side. I am with you, but since I'm running dual screens here, I will be reading from some notes. So I am still with you and got this up in front of you. Great. Whoops, sorry. Told you I would have some technical difficulties. Okay. It is very hard to run this solo, I gotta say. All right. So all right. So with that, sorry about that. There are 31 days remaining, 74 days down of the 2025 legislative session. We are at a point when bills are still being heard from their opposite house. The legislature uses the term house, although I find that somewhat confusing because there is a House of Representatives and there is a Senate. So in some of the materials I provide for you, I specify chamber because I think of the House chamber and the Senate chamber as being the two distinct chambers of the legislative body. But there's the opposite House or chamber policy cutoff, which occurs next week, next Wednesday, and then the opposite House fiscal cutoff, which occurs April 8th, just following that. Then you have the full opposite chamber cutoff on April 16th. So what all this means is, you may recall at the beginning of the session, their bills started in the Senate, moved through the Senate, policy, fiscal, onto the Senate floor. Now they're in the House. So that opposite chamber process has to be concluded in its entirety by April 16th. There's another strange thing that happens. So a bill in its original form, it makes it out of the, let's say, the Senate. It's probably amended by the time it makes it off the Senate floor and goes over to the House. Well, the House may have the opportunity to additionally amend those Senate bills. If they do, there's something called concurrence, which means that, or reconciliation is another way they might describe it. What that means is that if the House changes a Senate bill or the Senate changes a House bill, has to go back to the originating body for concurrence or reconciliation. That means that the body will determine whether or not they accept the amendments of the opposite chamber. If they do not, the bill's probably dead this session because there's not a lot of time to move it back and forth. If they do, then likely it progresses through the next stages of the process. They don't have a lot of time to do that. You'll see a 10-day window in there. There may be an opportunity to continue to testify on bills, but you'll note that at this point in session, our focus and the legislators' focus really is on the state of the budget. And that's really where the biggest conversations are going on right now. Sine Die is scheduled for April 27th. We're still hearing lots of different things about whether or not there will be a special session. But right now, the leaning is that they will do everything they can to have it wrapped up in a regular session and will be done by April 27th. I would say there's more of a 50% sort of agreement right now that we're going to end on time. Now, that was different last week. I would say it was less probable last week, more probable this week. It's going to change, and it's going to change. I'm going to go ahead and close this because I can't see the notes that I needed to actually give you some additional detail on this. So please excuse my navigation here. So what I wanted to share with you is that the resource and materials that I'm going to provide have a lot of detail in them, a lot of information. Please don't hesitate to put your questions in the chat. I will do my best to answer them either today, and if I don't get to them or I don't know the answer, I will definitely hold on to the chat notes and provide you with an answer next week when we gather together. But I think it's just important to note that things will change. We have a House and a Senate proposed budget that will, some of which will actually be in the final budget, but there's a lot of things that will change in between now and April 27th. So again, please feel free to answer questions. I will do my best to answer today. And none of what you see right now is final, but they are to be taken seriously, especially where we might have some concerns and need to bring them up. So we saw versions of both a proposed House and Senate budget earlier this week. They were released on Monday. We heard them in House Appropriations and Senate Ways and Means on Tuesday. We testified in both committees on that. We testified pro on the Senate side. We testified other on the House side. I'll dig into some more of the details why as we take a look at actual numbers here momentarily. Something just to note about the bills that we saw, they are actually the same bill numbers that we testified on at the very beginning of session, which reflected at the beginning of session the former Governor Inslee's proposed budgets for both the House and the Senate side. So what we testified on this week was what they would refer to as a striking amendment or a substitute bill for both of those. So they took the original versions of the House and Senate proposed operating budgets and laid over changes that are reflective of the many conversations they've been having this session that include policy changes, cuts, and potentially some considerations for revenue, although those are in most cases separate bills. The House, generally speaking, I'm going to make some generalizations, so just take them as high-level overview, not absolute truth. But the House generally aimed to focus on social services, protecting food, shelter, and overall health of Washingtonians. So they looked at steep cuts and introduced just a little bit of spending for K-12, not nearly as much as the Senate did, who looked at steep cuts also, big tax packages on both sides. And in the Senate side added approximately $2 billion for K-12 over the next 4 years. So again, I'm going to dig into the details, and I'm sure you've seen some of this, but lots of different ways to look at this stuff. Both budgets combined cuts with new revenue options. Washington State, as you are aware, is grappling with roughly $15 billion in a, some might refer to as a budget deficit, some might refer to as a shortfall over the course of the next 4 years. Lots of different ways to grapple with that. There has been some consensus in both bodies around cutting some of the child care subsidies as well as Fair Start for Kids programs. That's obviously going to have an implication for K-12. Any cut that they make to any sector most likely will have some implication for the families in our state and the students in our schools. There's also some consensus from both of them on the transition to kindergarten program, and I will get into the details on that. Like I said, the Senate proposed $2.2 billion in special education over the next 4 years. We like that a lot. It's almost the full slate of funding need, and not everything that we need for MSOC, but something. Whereas on the House side, they provided a nominal amount for special education and none for material supplies and operating costs. Both of the House and Senate bills are scheduled for this afternoon in executive session to pass out of their respective committees, and then conversations will continue through the rest of the session. We'll also note that some of the policy bills that are reflected, if there is any cost or need to allocate resources to them for implementation, those will be reflected in the budget bill. So if a Senate bill is progressing, you'll see it reflected in the Senate proposed budget. Those bills actually do have to pass if the funds are to be allocated for them. And if the bill doesn't pass, then those funds wouldn't be allocated in the respective budgets. Just things to note. So a little bit of how we got to where we are considering the shortfall. That it is actually expected that revenue will continue to increase. However, the revenue growth just did not match the commitments that were made in past legislative sessions. So it's not as high as projected, but when we look at these numbers, it seems pretty grim. So they're making adjustments based on the forecast from last year that anticipated growth that we have not seen, which is why they're having to make adjustments right now. So the big question for the next 30 days, and probably for all of you in your own communities and homes, is, does there need to be more taxes in order to pay for the increases, or to at least just adjust to where we are? And how many cuts also need to be made in order to make that adjustment? And all of this depends on who you ask, not just by politics, but also by policy. Some believe cuts would do it. So there are some perspective that there's no need to increase taxes in order to cover the shortfall. Other believes that taxes are absolutely necessary. My guess, although anything can happen, is that we're going to see both. We're going to see revenue proposals, tax packages pass, and we're also going to see cuts to programs in K-12 as well as in other sectors. If we dig down into the details of the proposed operating budgets for both the House and the Senate, it will look like, and truly is, that they are literally scraping for dollars. Some cuts are much more significant, impactful for others, but they're looking at any way, I think, to ensure that they don't have to raise taxes and have the least impact to the classroom. This is the real opportunity for us to identify where some of those cuts might have real and lasting impacts to the K-12 system, and to surface those concerns now. Okay, so with that, I'm going to get back to my PowerPoint presentation, and that will enable us to look through some specific numbers, which I know is very helpful to you all. Okay, play from current slide. Okay, so hopefully you all saw this. One of the things that was helpful for me was to take a look at the operating budgets at a high level side by side. And so what you're looking at, Senate supplemental is what we're currently, Senate and House supplemental, the supplemental year is what we're currently in. And then you've got the bienniums, the next 2 years looking ahead. So there are some adjustments and increases made to the current year, although not a lot, but some may be significant to you. I got a great question actually earlier on, like what does K-3 class size reversions mean? This number is actually cost savings. So these are unspent dollars. So this is actually not taking dollars away that are currently allocated, but rather savings from unspent dollars in the current coffer. Also interesting that I just want to point out that the only place in the overarching budget analysis where we see alignment between the House and the Senate currently is for student meals, both in the supplemental budgets as well as in the next biennium. I think that's significant and more than likely is influenced by the interest of the governor in ensuring that student meals are covered for the foreseeable future. I'm going to get into some of these policy conversations, but I just want to note that there is a bill 2050 that would shift apportionment dates. I'm going to show you what those are on another slide. And while in this spreadsheet or line by line item, you don't see anything in the Senate, seems like we're safe over there as it relates to significant date changes for apportionment. There actually are date changes for apportionment in the Senate proposed budget. It's not on their high level overview. It's buried more in the devil in the details. We're still navigating exactly what that means because the dates are strange, but as soon as we have something definitive we can share with you, we certainly will. Going to talk more about TK here later. I think things to pay attention to are where you see this negative sign out in front, which literally means they're making cuts or moving dollars, being creative with where they put the money and when. Some of these will have greater and more significant impact for you than others. And we won't get into all the nitty-gritty details of these, but I am going to try to surface for you where you might want to pay the most attention by reaching out to your own legislators and letting me know what's most significant to you so that I can be sure I'm communicating that, especially to our members on the fiscal committees. Also, just to note here down at the bottom, where it's red, it's a negative, where it's green, it's an increase. It's pretty darn clear that the current version of the Senate operating budget provides us with the most benefits, most specifically around special education increases. All right, so what does all this mean? I took some of our partners did a really great job of doing some side-by-side analysis. And so I just want to give credit for a couple of these slides. These side-by-sides come directly from the Washington Education Association, WEA's website. That website link is also included in the InSession agenda. So you can go directly to their website, and then Levon Williams, our policy analyst, took those numbers and put it in a spreadsheet in case that's how your brain works better. I also provided a link to that. So these are directly from that information, but I'm drawing attention specifically to those areas I think you'll be most interested in. So again, to reiterate, House side for special education, there's a slight increase, but when we compare it to the Senate, it's really just peanuts. The multipliers are increased in both cases, but again, you'll notice much more significant on the Senate side. Also more significant on the Senate side is that lowers the safety net and also removes the enrollment cap. Also allows for those quarterly payments on both sides here. And then material supplies and operating costs is fairly obvious here in front of you. On the House side, there's no investment for MSOC, and there is a little over 400 million over 4 years. This obviously doesn't get us to filling the full gap, but it certainly is preferable to the House side. I don't imagine that in the final budget we'll see numbers any larger than this. So what we're asking for is for the Senate to hold strong in their position here and for the House to look to the Senate's position as the best opportunity to meet their obligation for the state constitution's paramount duty. All right, moving on. Many of you have transitioned to kindergarten programs, and there's been a lot of conversations about what they want to do with that. There are policy and program conversations going on. What I will just generally note for you that the House and Senate seem to agree that they're going to pause on increases for now. So that there would be no additional enrollment at the district level for the next biennium until they have a better sense of what to do next. The good news is that it doesn't reduce your funding, but it holds your funding at what it currently is, at least for the next biennium. I know this says 4 years, and that is what's on the proposed operating budget plan. We oftentimes just look at the next biennium because that's right in front of us and what you most specifically need to understand. And also, when they come back in a future legislative session, they can change some of those numbers. Levy equalization, I'm going to talk to you about the specific bills that address these, but you will note in the House version of the budget that there is a greater increase for levy equalization here. I'll talk about the policy details. They're laid out a little bit more easy to look at on a slide. Less so on the Senate side. So the Senate really focused on special education and MSOC, whereas the House looked more to levy and LEA. And you see that number clearly differentiated here in the almost 610 million increase on the House side, just the 26 million on the Senate side. One additional thing to note that they seem to both agree that there is a savings or a reduction opportunity by reducing your LEA if your district has over 33% of enrollment in ALE. I've got another slide that lays this out a little bit, but if you have ALE programs, I would be continuing to pay additional attention to this. We brought this to your attention from Senate Bill 5772 earlier in the session. While that bill did not progress out of its committees, they are considering this policy idea necessary to implement the budget as a cost savings measure. Also to note that alignment here for both the House and the Senate, this is part of the operating budget proposals, that the implicit price deflator is at 2.5 for the next school year and 2.6 for the 26-27 school years. Okay, some specific bills to watch as they relate to the budget. I mentioned this earlier, but House Bill 2050 is titled Implementing K-12 Savings and Efficiencies. I don't know that I need to tell you this, but savings is another word for reduction. So just important to note that. It does change your apportionment schedule. And while this is in the House bill, so it's in the House budget and there is a House bill that relates to it, the Senate does have a version of this baked into their operating budget. That's just a 1-year shift. And again, we'll get you more details of that. Just came to our attention within the last 24 hours. So there's really 2 parts of this bill, a change to your apportionment dates or your schedule, and then the local effort assistant reduction of 33% in school districts which have a student FTE count in their ALE programs that exceed 33% of your total enrollment. So 2 things combined here, both very impactful policy issues, probably to many of you, if not most, on the apportionment schedule, and then to some of you based on your ALE programs. I just also want to note before I move on to the next slide that in our testimony to House appropriations, in 60 seconds, there's not a lot of time to bring up much detail, but I did bring up the fact that by changing the apportionment schedule, while the legislature's looking at that as a savings to them in a year, it puts districts in a hugely difficult position that in some cases would have to borrow money from their cities or counties, potentially paying back with interest, especially if they do not have the savings to cover that in between phase that this gap would be, or that this schedule would be creating. So we did bring that up, and one of the legislators, former school directors, asked me for my testimony. I think she was hopeful to continue working on that from behind the scenes. Okay, so you saw this a little bit earlier just in the side-by-side, but there is a newly introduced House Bill 2049, Investing in the State's Paramount Duty. That's a great title. We like that to fund K-12 education. And you will note that in terms of how they're seeing their paramount duty in the bill title is to change levy equalization. So again, lots of ways to look at this. This will benefit some districts far more than others. For those districts that it benefits, we will not, as an organization, be pushing back on that, but we do continue to remind our legislators that this will be helpful to some, but not for all, and that their paramount duty is to amply fund basic education universally and equally for all of our schools. So lots of details here. If you have specific questions about this, go ahead and put it in the chat. I likely will need to look into it more, but you'll note that these are the numbers currently and are subject to change. We brought to your attention a bill that did not progress out of its fiscal committee earlier, but is also embedded in some of the savings language in the Senate operating budget around your electric vehicles. So if you received an electric vehicle via grant or rebate, there is a proposal still on the table within the operating budget that would allow OSPI to ensure that the depreciation schedule does not apply to the grant portion or the rebate portion of your electric vehicle buses had you received those through a grant or a rebate. Marie Sullivan, one of our colleagues in the education advocate space, has been really at the forefront of making sure legislators know what the implications for this all. Certainly, this has huge implications for future electric vehicle purchases, particularly if they're through grants or rebates. So there's a partnership, I understand, with the environmental community to put this type of idea to the side. And then one bill just to draw your attention to, WSSDA as an organization will not be involved in conversations around tax reform or revenue increases, tax increases. We don't have a member adopted position that provides enough detail that would indicate where we can and cannot weigh in here. But I do want to draw your attention to this one in particular, as it may impact school districts related to payroll tax. An additional 5% tax increase on above the Social Security threshold for any employee earning over the 176,000 marker. For those employers with 7 million or more in total payroll expenses. So this will only be a portion of you, but for those of you who it would apply to, there may be some significant concern. Okay, that ends what I provided in the PowerPoint, and now I want to pivot to some of the resources that are listed in the InSession agenda. So with the philosophy of teaching you how to fish, I just wanted to show you when the budgets are released, sort of the process by which we and our partners go through. Everybody does it a little bit different way, and here's one way you might approach it or make it your own. So the most important website here is fiscal.wa.gov. And when we understood the operating budgets were going to come out, we were able to find them under these links. So if you go, I'm going to start with the Senate budget resources because from my perspective, I found them to be easier to navigate. That doesn't mean one's better than the other, just from my own learning. Yours may be different. I started with the Senate and then built from there. So you've got the full bill, 5167 here, and this is the substitute bill. So it includes the language that they've proposed that we heard in committee this week. Then you've got a general overview document. This is highest level overview of what their operating budget is proposing, not just related to K-12, but to all sectors. And then the other resource I find helpful is the agency detail. So those are the three things that I look at, and I start with the budget overview and then move to agency detail. You may have a different approach to it. There's no wrong way to do this, but for the benefit of your own learning, I'm just sharing with you the approach that I take. So if we start with the budget overview, again, this is hyperlinked in InSession Live agenda. I will tell you this is nice. It's only 8 pages long. That's why it's a good starting point. It's not too overwhelming. And what I really appreciated about this is it gave not all of the information, but a high level overview on where their maintenance level dollars were going. You'll note we are here at the top, 29% of their maintenance dollars to K-12 education. And then at the policy level, they talk about spending. So that would be the increases in their budget that they are considering or have included, and the exact sort of numbers in any bill that might be affiliated with that increase. So the largest spending item in the Senate's operating budget is for special education, and it is funded at the levels of 5263, as we continue to advocate for through the session. This does not come as a huge surprise because it's the floor majority leader, Senator Jamie Peterson, who sponsored this bill with the support of Senator Wellman, who's a strong K-12 advocate and the chair of the Early Learning and K-12 Committee. They really came together to make sure this bill progressed out of committee and through the fiscal committees onto the House floor with a beautiful floor debate, we would call it, but there was really no debate. It was more of a love fest. So it's not a surprise to see that that bill's fully funded here. Lots of other really important spending issues here, but I'm just focused on K-12. So I'll note that their number 7 highest spending item is on material, supplies, and operating costs, also aligned with 5192. So you'll see that there in the 0.4 billion range. So they're looking at a total increase of 9.7 billion. Then if you go here, the 10 largest savings, or as we've discussed, reductions or cuts, you might call them, show negative balances. So this is where they're looking at making a savings, okay? And you will note just an elusive K through 12 grants program reduction. Again, all kinds of different considerations here. We'll kind of skim through what those are. You might have some questions about some of the specific. A lot of these are budget provisos that go directly to OSPI, which may fund actual programs that are related to professional learning or pilot projects in your own communities that support innovations in K-12. Again, they're sort of all over the map and may or may not directly impact your district budgets or even maybe your own program offerings. So something to note there. Then you'll note here revenue legislation. The Senate has multiple bills and considerations over revenue increases in revenue, as well as ways that they're looking at reducing or saving dollars. Okay, so that gives you sort of a high level overlook. And then I took the K-12 category here. I looked at totals for each of these and created that side-by-side spreadsheet that was embedded into the PowerPoint presentation I just showed you. I also have a more extensive document that I shared out, and it's also linked to the in-session agenda. So this is where I took these numbers. These may or may not mean something to you. Some of them are really obvious what they are, and some of them require a much deeper dive. So that's sort of the first high level overview. So then you're like, all right, I want to know a little bit more about what these things mean. So then you go into the agency detail. And I'm going to click on that from InSession Live. I cheated. I already had it pulled up to the to the section. I wanted to show you. You're like, oh my goodness, this is several hundred thousand pages, several hundred pages. So how do I know where to go? I generally just go search and find public schools, and that'll get me to the area. So you'll note on the Senate agency detail, it starts on page 235. So these numbers that you see here are reflected in that earlier document, but in terms of policy, other changes and reductions, then you're going to start to see some more detail about what actual programs are impacted. So this is the next layer, a little bit deeper. So you'll see where there might be some reductions in the BEST program. Our colleagues at WEA have great concern about the implications and impact for teacher prep programs, as well as some of the professional learning dollars that are allocated here being reduced. Then you'll see if there's not a negative in front of it, that means that's they're increasing the amount or adding the amount. You'll see that bus depreciation amount here. CEP expansion, that number aligns with the earlier document. So I'm not going to go line by line for each of these, but just noting that each of them have a reason. Many of them are related to a bill. For instance, the education complaint process bill, that's the 5179, for which we've expressed to our legislators both on the House and Senate side. It's a pretty significant concern about the process it creates. There was a fiscal note associated with that, primarily for OSPI to manage that complaints process. It's not $771, it's actually $771,000. These numbers are in the thousands. So that money is allocated for OSPI to manage this process. Other additional programs, Holocaust and genocide education, looking at a $400,000 add, LEA online enrollment cap. So you're looking at the reduction there to the LEA ALE. Ooh, that is a tongue twister. Savings or reduction here. Learning standards, that's another bill. So some of these are more significant than others, whether or not they actually touch your classrooms or your buildings. Some of them are further away than others, where we've asked districts to keep their cuts as far away from the classroom as possible. So again, lots of details here, and the list goes on. And then you're like, what is that first one, the Aviation Academy? What I really like about the way that the Senate agency detail is laid out is they've got other policy changes. Number one, Aviation Academy. Then once you get through the budget numbers list, they've actually got those provided in more detail. So you'll see a little bit more detail listed here, and they are listed in order, correlating with the list above it with additional information. So I find that extraordinarily helpful. And then if you really want to get into the details of it, you actually go to the budget bill and walk yourself through some of the hundreds of pages that are specified for K-12. We're not going to do that here today. But again, you start at a high level and you're able to dig in a little bit more. And all of these are available to you on that fiscal.wa.gov website to review. So I'm going to take this off. I'm going to take a quick look at questions, just see if there's anything I can help. There's a question about sending the PowerPoint. Yes, I will send that to you, Martha. And then if any of you actually additionally want that, if you could shoot me an email, then I can just respond to it, and that would be most helpful. And then Jackie asked a question about the 2.25 billion over 4 years. Does that mean 55 billion per year? They think about it in terms of a biennium. If we're doing math on bienniums, you're looking at about 1 billion in this next biennium. So to start, that's the 2025 to 2027 biennium. So essentially, yes, if the apportionment dates line up exactly as we're thinking, about 1 billion per biennium. Great questions. Okay, so now I want to give fair billing to the House. And the House materials are just a little bit differently organized. However, they include the same general information, just organized a little bit differently. So we've got the operating budget summary for the House. Things just to call your attention to. They're looking at more investments in the social services areas and just slightly less revenue generation, just slightly less, about $1 billion less than on the Senate side. If you think about what costs they're looking at K-12 salary inflation as one of their costs. So that's the IPD, or the COLAs, as some may call it. And I thought this part was interesting, just revenue legislation coming through 2045, 2046, and as you may recall from my PowerPoint, 2049. So they are literally looking at it, the levy equalization, the levy lid, and LEA adjustments being revenue, which I think is just interesting language framing. I pulled these numbers from this portion into that overall spreadsheet. So again, some of these line items are not in the Senate, but all of these line items are listed in that overall document I provided. So where there is something not in the House but in the Senate, I just marked that with a 0 and vice versa. So I'm not going to go through any more of that. I want to show the agency detail for the House.
Marissa, is there any way I can help you? You want me to share something?
No, I've got to pull it up from my slides or from my screen. Thanks, though. All right. I think this is right. Okay. So now we're looking at the agency detail on the House side of things. And again, you'll notice that it's just organized a little bit differently. And this all starts on page 248. They actually break it out into categories. So this might actually be helpful for you in kind of thinking about it. So they've got sort of the statewide OSPI programs where they've made increases or reductions and what those areas will be. And then they'll separate it into State Board of Education here, PESB, back to general apportionment on public schools and where the changes are. Pupil transportation. This is just maintenance level. Just as a note, none of the House and the Senate didn't include any increases for special passengers in either of their operating budgets. Unfortunately, that was one of our priority issues, but we didn't make moves on that. So it's interesting just how they do it differently. Sort of Senate sort of lumps all of the issues together, whereas the House separates it by particular issue areas. So if you were looking for something specific, it would be helpful if you did the if you try to find a specific word, and then that will help you get to a policy area. This one included special education. I also think it's interesting that for all of these public school areas, the apportionment shift is listed as a comment because it will impact all of it, regardless of the policy area, and important for you to make note of. Okay, I'm going to stop share there. All right. I also wanted to show you a couple of those side-by-side documents. So this is one that we created that gives the full side-by-side. Again, this is in your hyperlinks. So you've got supplemental side-by-sides, the next biennium, and then the 5-year outlook for both. Again, we like green. Green is good. And therefore, if we're looking at Senate side, significantly stronger investment in K-12. Then other ways to look at this work. WA proposed, really great resource here. Every organization is going to have a little bit different take and a little bit different type of thing they're drawing your attention to. So if you look at the side-by-side that they've created on their website, starting with total spending, then focus on K-12. They also include higher education. WA has been much more involved in the tax increases or revenue conversations. They have more flexibility to do so. They're not a state agency like we are, and also our advocacy work is entirely supported by member adopted positions. And so we just don't have member adopted positions that address these types of issue areas. We have a very general position on tax reform, but it specifically points to the tax reform work group recommendations that tax reform work group has since been dissolved and doesn't have any layer of detail that would enable us to weigh in on these policy proposals. Certainly you as a citizen are welcome to have opinions about it and share those with your state electeds. Unfortunately, we're not able to do so. Then you get into some K-12. One pretty big shift since the beginning of session is that there were reduction considerations or proposals that would have at least paused or eliminated for the biennium, or at least reduced the National Board Certified Teacher stipends. As we see the operating budgets that came out those considerations are no longer included in those operating proposals. So those stipends would be maintained. Again, they're also, like us, looking at pauses to transition to kindergarten, and some other sort of policy level issues around SEB and pension. So this is a really great resource. I would highly encourage you to take a look at this. Provides quite a bit more detail in a way that might be easier for you to look at. Okay, I'm going to stop there. I'm going to share one more. And this is the League of Education Voters. They put out a side-by-side every year too, so something that you can rely on for the future. They have quite a few issue areas they're looking at. So they're starting with early childhood, but then they're looking at K-12 funding. What I like about the way they lay this out is they have the plus or minus signs. They make it real easy to sort of see the difference that for special education, there is an increase on the House side. Senate is significantly greater. No changes for MSOC on the House side, but 175 million in the Senate. LEA increases on the House side, but not in the Senate side. No enrichment funding for charter schools on either side there. Then you're looking at some K-12 student support. So this is more of that student-centered policy level considerations. Again, difference between both bodies. None of this is written in stone. So these are all areas for negotiation. And this is just the K-12 sector. Multiply this towards police reform, healthcare, juvenile justice, mental health and social support services. So we are one of many important issue areas that they are grappling with across the spectrum. Okay, those are all the resources that I had embedded into InSession Live. Let's look at some Q&A. Lisa has some questions about levy changes in LEA. I'm going to take your question and I will be sure to get you answers for next week. But on the fly, I apologize. I'm not able to answer that right now. So with that, I'm going to make sure that I write down, Lisa, your question so I can bring it back next week. Write down. And I don't see any other questions in the chat. So I think that's all. Oh, I did have one other thing I wanted to draw your attention to before we said goodbye. So what can you do from here? I will let you know that WSSDA is working closely right now with WASA and AWSP to craft a statewide letter to our legislators, imploring them to stay at the Senate levels. I don't think there will be anything bigger than that. So I think the best we'll see is at the Senate levels, and my guess is it might be a little bit less than that or a lot less than that. We just don't know. It's all going to depend on the conversations that occur in the next 30 days, many of which will be behind closed doors. We will see some things out in front, but my guess is we actually won't see a final budget proposal until probably a couple days before the end of the session. That doesn't mean we won't know what conversations are going on, because we'll be talking with legislators, you'll be talking with legislators and letting us know what you're hearing. In the meantime, we will be keeping the pedal to the metal, if you will, and we ask you to do the same. One way that you can do that, I embedded in here under other legislative resources, the Tacoma Public Schools letter to the legislature. And their superintendent provided a really great letter. I'm not suggesting you copy and paste it, but rather craft something potentially similar that would have a similar sort of message or tone. And just really like the way that this is organized because it's literally a plea for help. Like we are really, and we're not making this up, folks. We are in dire situations. We're looking at cuts. We've already made them. We're looking at more. All of this impacts the student experience and outcomes. In Tacoma, they have been looking at all types of local supports from community organizations who are also experiencing their own sorts of cuts. And therefore, our ask is that they are funding at the 5263 levels. I mean, so in the WASA WASDA WASBO letter, some of this language is somewhat paralleled, including an ask to keep at the 5263 levels, an ask to look at MSOC in the full need, which was House Bill 1338, which had not progressed through the legislative process. Again, just asking them for a reminder about their paramount duty. So this letter is also embedded. I would encourage you to think about what you might communicate and how you will communicate it to your legislators. We've still got 30 days left to influence them. Like I said, keep that pedal on the gas. This is no time to let up. Decisions have not been finally made. There is still opportunity to make a change. So with that, it's 12:56. If you have any further questions, please reach out to me directly via email. Thank you for being here today.